Welcome, everyone, to the Trailblazing Leaders podcast. It's my promise to you to bring you exceptional leaders who have demonstrated a passion for talent development and the impact it has on business growth. My guests will be discussing a range of leadership topics, from the art of high-performance teams to compassionate coaching, and importantly, the driving impact culture has on growth and revenue and profits. We're going to have the privilege to hear some incredibly compelling stories, learn about innovative practices, and gain transformative ideas from the best professionals and the most successful individuals in their industry. And if you stay with me to the end of the program, I'm going to share a special gift offer I have with all of you who attend. I'm very excited to introduce Ron Fry, a distinguished professor in the Department of Organizational Behavior at the Weatherhead School of Management, Case Western Reserve University. His educational background includes a BS in engineering from the University of California, Los Angeles, my alma mater, and both his PhD and MA from the AP Sloan School of Management, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His scholarly work has focused on the dynamics that foster system-wide positive change. And this includes large group dynamics, appreciative leadership, multi-stakeholder strategic planning, and the role of business as an agent for world benefit. He is an author and co-author of several books on these subjects, such as Appreciative Inquiry, A Positive Approach to Building Cooperative Capacity, and Appreciative Team Building. He is renowned for aiming to increase the cooperative capacity through the Appreciative Inquiry method in diverse systems, including World Vision, Lubrizol, Roadway Express, the U.S. Navy, Genesis Health Systems, and Mid-Ohio Full Bank. I am honored to have the privilege to have learned directly about Appreciative Inquiry from Professor Ron Fry, and I'm excited now to welcome him as my guest on this episode. Ron, let's just go ahead and talk about our favorite topic, Appreciative Inquiry, the why, the what, the how it works for trailblazing leaders who are seeking to create high-impact cultures and teams. So I'm going to just turn it over to you and give you a wide swath to work with.
Oh, thank you, Russell. Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you, too.
You can keep reminding me of the order there, the why, the what, the how. I think the why for this strength-based approach to human and organizational system change and transformation. I think we don't have to look further than all the research on employee engagement, quiet quitting, the great what do they call it? The Great Resignation after COVID, and the studies that now show that about 70% of intentional change programs, meaning, executives and leaders set out with a clear goal, objective, and try to implement a change, about 70% fail. That is not a very good track record. We are leaving a whole lot of money on the table, it seems. So that's part of the why. I think that we have sort of maxed out our ability to use traditional problem solving, gap analysis, statistical process control to improve systems. Every organization has to be doing those things, and but it seems to just keep us kind of at the status quo. It's not helping us to innovate or create or grow the way most companies would wish. So the strength-based approach, which is the essence of appreciative inquiry, is an option, an alternative that we think can improve that success rate, from 30% to 70% success and 30% failure, or 80-20, whatever you want to think about it. But I think what we've discovered and has been validated in the sciences of neuroscience and positive psychology is that when you connect people to their shared strengths, they will see the future differently. They will see more possibility. So all change, all transformation begins with a shared purpose or a shared goal. We all know that. But how do we get stakeholders, internal, external, combined, how do we get them to imagine together a positive future? That's not just incremental. It's not just let's do 10% better or let's have 10% fewer mistakes, those kind of incremental goals. So Appreciative Inquiry is a rigorous search to identify the shared strengths that exist in the system already, the things that help it be at its best, and then using that as the platform to imagine future possibilities. So we call that the discover and dream phase. You discover the core life-giving factors that already help you be at your best, even though you know that you want to do it more often or you want to expand it, but you find what gives life currently. And when stakeholders do that together, they begin to connect in what we call a generative way. So they ideate, they dream, they imagine future possibilities, twice as many as they would if they hadn't connected through their strengths. And much, much more bolder, much more like that old popular phrase, BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goal, not just incremental. So then you've created a shared image. You've created a connection amongst people that's built around when they're at their best, and that gives you the space or the grounding for design work, for co-design. So then you engage the stakeholders in co-designing their future, and then the sort of last phase, we call it destiny or sometimes deployment or delivery, is implementing those designs, implementing those action plans. So the what is this strength-based approach to begin by connecting people to their strengths, which is a different starting point from most change programs. We don't start with the gap. We don't start with the problem analysis. So we begin with this shared strengths. Then we use that to help people see future possibilities. Then they converge on the possibilities they're most excited about. And now you've got the conditions for, again, we call it a generative connection, where they invent new ideas and they don't just ideate, but once they have the new ideas, they want to work on them. They want to continue involvement. They don't just wait for a manager to delegate them to a future task force or something like that.
So, Ron, I'd like you to explore or talk about why the focus on strengths gets more strength versus the focus on gap and on weakness and problem solving. Let's talk about what that does to the mind and to a large group.
Well, part of my thought there, Russell, is what you actually began with. We've concluded, and when I say we, I don't mean just a handful of people. We don't learn a lot about success by studying failure, period.
Key point.
We learn to avoid failure, but that's not the same as success. That's like saying health is the absence of disease. Health is more than the absence of disease. So we can continue working and addressing gaps, or that's just my catch-all phrase for, quote, problems, keep correcting, but it's not going to take us to another level. There's just no evidence anywhere that transformation comes from studying failures or reducing errors. Maybe a status quo comes from reducing errors, but for companies that want to grow, companies that want to win in their industries and so forth, or organizations that just want to thrive, doesn't have to be a for-profit, something else is needed. We don't see that addressing gaps and problems in the traditional way actually is conducive to growth. It tends to actually, I would argue, go the other way. The more we believe we can control for error, we actually eliminate the space for innovation, because innovation is all about trial and error.
So
we appreciate errors in real innovation.
Yeah. So I'd like to the leaders listening, let's talk right now about some cases, because on one hand, this is not just theory, right? The university and you and David Cooperrider and many associates this is 20, 30, 40 years of study and result and implementation for the Navy, for the UN, for Roadway Express. So I think maybe at this point, I'd like to just hit on some highlights of the tremendous amount of value the approach of Appreciative Inquiry has brought to others to help substantiate why this is such an important concept to consider if you're a leader trying to thrive.
Well, you touched on a few of the examples where we have really good measures, so I'll just kind of highlight a couple of those. Roadway Express tripled their share price during a recession, and they attribute their business success to the way they internalized using what we call an Appreciative Inquiry summit method. So over a 5 to 6 year period, they ran almost 60 two-day summits throughout sites all over North America, Mexico, Canada. And they attribute, this isn't our, sort of personalized story, but they attribute that growth and the fact that it made them a very high takeover target because they had gained market share. But they attributed that to applying this process with stakeholder groups at their sites, union and management, shoulder to shoulder, over a 5-year period. Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, Fairmount Minerals, now Covia, they report decades or more of double-digit growth, again, through recessionary periods, and attribute it to, again, their adoption, not just of the summit method, but also using the outcomes of the summit, these working groups or these design groups, to actually embed sustainability into their business model. And in the Green Mountain Coffee Roasters example, we all know that they were one of the pioneers in the coffee industry in terms of sharing profits with the actual growers, the organic coffee industry. And in the Fairmount Minerals case, it's a sand mining company that was spending all kinds of money in court in the communities where they were mining, and they transformed themselves into a, if you will, a green mining company, a sustainable mining company that was, as I said, profitable at a double-digit growth rate. The Navy that you mentioned, in terms of employee involvement and retainment, they used Appreciative Inquiry over almost a decade in 7 different commands. But the one story with the best metrics is the first one, where they reported to Congress a $2 billion savings in unnecessary training costs by doubling their retention rate at the 18-month mark, the first end of tour where volunteers can leave or re-up. So by doubling that, and they held a Appreciative Inquiry Summit. We can talk a little bit later maybe about some of the details of that to address this issue of retention in an appreciative way, in a strength-based way. And as a result of that and the outcomes, the change ideas and initiatives that came out of that, they reported to Congress a $2 billion savings. World Vision, just to give you an example of a nonprofit, that's the world's largest private donor-supported children's relief and development agency. They were able to create a 10-year strategic plan in less than 3 months with 8,000 of their members, their volunteers and paid staff. And that was both in person and virtual at the same time.
I think those are great, Ron. So I'm going to just stop you there.
Yep.
I want to focus a little bit on this word where people get hung up between strength-based and appreciative inquiry and the clarification. This isn't about just saying, I appreciate you. You know, the word appreciation has multiple meanings. You develop it and use that as the lead. But I think it would be important to understand, what is the richness of the word appreciative and how does it support strength or vice versa?
Yeah. As you well know, Russell, I'm quoted often for saying that appreciative inquiry is not about being positive. We leverage positivity and the science of positivity. We leverage that a lot. So I don't make any excuses about creating a process that shines the light on positive aspects of human performance. But the goal, the end point, is not just for everybody to feel positive. It's a means to an end. The end is something I mentioned earlier. We call it generative connections. These are not things that you have to have every day with every person. But when you need to innovate, when you need to create, when you need to make a transformation, then having stakeholders who can create new ideas that challenge the status quo and not just hand that list off, but actually own it and want to implement it. That is a unique connection. That's what we call a generative connection. And that's the hidden capacity in all human systems. It's there. No matter how much they may be currently suffering, if the doors are still open, if there's still some cash flow, there's huge cooperative capacity that's untouched. And so this generative connection is the real unique contribution. The terms that we started with, appreciative and inquiry, appreciative is really this idea of putting on the lens, the framework that says, what is there that I value in this situation, this context? What is there to be valued? And I place value on it by studying it. So if I'm looking for what is it that gives life to this team when we are in flow or when we are at our best, then I'm valuing something by looking into it, by examining it. And as we tend to believe, the real estate metaphor or analogy, the more you value something, the more valuable it becomes.
Yes.
Now, the other part of this is inquiry. Appreciative is an adjective or an adverb, and inquiry is the noun or the verb. So it's important to realize that this all began with an emphasis on inquiry. how do we inquire? How do we learn in a way that fosters change and transformation? All change starts with learning. If there's no learning, there's no changing. So how do we inquire? How do we learn in a way that produces or creates the conditions for these generative connections? So appreciation is, yes, it's taking the positive potential focus. What is it that gives life? What is it that helps us be at our best? So that is the bias. That's the appreciative turn. But it's all about inquiry. It's about guiding, creating questions that guide a study of something. So then we're back to the phrase earlier. If we study bad, we'll get less bad.
Yeah.
If we study great, then we have a chance to be great.
Yes. So we have so appreciative inquiry is a formal process that allows team members to open up their mind in a safe environment and co-create and co-generate. And what I love about it, and the reason I have studied with you and with David, is because this aspect we started with, engagement. Well, if I don't feel valued, if I don't feel heard, if I don't feel listened to, if I don't have a platform to share my ideas and I'm down in the bottom, well, then I don't really matter. But when a leader recognizes that the amount of brilliance sits within their whole human system, whether it be a 50, 100, thousands that you've talked about, the amount of human potential that leader can unleash by going through a process like this rather than the traditional transformation process is unlimited. I think that's a thing that really addresses this issue of how do we not only have more successful transformation, but how does an employee feel more engaged? Will they feel more valued because their ideas matter? And where you're saying is, hey, we're getting to the ideas that are generative, we build upon it, and now I can own my idea. I have a potential to actually do something with it.
Yeah. And again, I think the starting point, which is the thing that makes appreciative inquiry the most distinct or different, is how we begin. We begin with questions about when have things been at their best.
Yes.
What are the things that help success factors, whatever you want to call them, best practices? What are those things that help us, whoever that stakeholder group is, be at our best thus far? And that's a very different beginning point. But that sets in motion just what you're saying. This kind of unlocking of not just creative ideas, but more images of possibility. Most of us today, we walk around with a very long list of why something can't happen or won't happen. And that just limits even the ideas that will come up in a good process. So we all have downs, we all have ups. So why not study the ups as seriously as we've been studying the downs for the last 4, 5, 6 decades?
Yeah. The other thing about the appreciative inquiry process, when we start with when are we at our best, is the dream stage where you encourage to generate dozens and dozens of ideas using the IDEO process, where more ideas are better than few. And so idea builds upon idea, but to have that, you've got to create a safe place. Maybe we could talk about how the first piece of discovery sets up a safe culture for large ideation of what is possible.
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's some wonderful neuroscience that's emerged in the recent years to support this. So we don't, when I say we begin with connecting around strengths, we don't just ask people, list the strengths or list the best practices or list the success factors that you think have helped this team be at its best or help this business unit, whatever. We ask people to share stories about a time when they remember building a loyal customer relationship, or when they remember the team really innovating in an unusual and unexpected manner, or again, given what your topic is, then your stories are based around that topic. But there's an impact of storytelling that is different from list sharing. So we could agree, let's take a positive approach, or let's take an appreciative approach, or a strength-based approach. But if I ask you to just think about your job when it's at its best, when you're the most fulfilled, what are the success factors? So you give me some list that you've, in your cognition, you've created. If I ask you for a story, and I listen to that story, and then you and I inquire into that story about what were some of the success factors in that episode that you just talked about, something else happens. There's a neuroscientist at the University of San Diego, Paul Zak, who has written about, he has studied people listening to a good story and what happens in the brain, and how the brain triggers the release of a hormone. And this hormone called oxytocin is related to connectivity, orientation towards others, altruism. He's studied several outcome factors, and they all have to do with moving toward collaboration. So we found that by discovering strengths through storytelling, and then mutual inquiry into those stories, you build this cooperative connection. You build this space for cooperation.
Right.
And remarkably,
space.
I'm sorry, this may be a question coming later, but remarkably, you can do this virtually as well.
So that I'm sure that will be coming, and as remarkable, in this piece of the storytelling, what I've witnessed with you is the psychological safety that results from the oxytocin releases, because people come to the workplace guarded, even though they talk about, we're a safe culture, you could say anything, but by human nature, we're guarded. And if you're asking me to gain or gather in a room and put myself out there and take a risk, I need the safety to feel I could take the risk. And of course, the storytelling does that.
Yeah.
Let's just go deeper into, okay, now I've got safety. We're dreaming and ideating. How does that get inspired? What methods do you use to get lots of ideas out of these people, out of your people?
You mentioned IDEO, and what we learned from IDEO, which you headlined there, is important. If you think like a designer or act like a designer, then at the brainstorming or barnstorming phase, you want to go for quantity, and you let go of quality. You let go of that concern or that question. And what we've discovered is that that's an upside down suggestion for most managers. If they hold a meeting and they get 10 or 12 good ideas, they're happy. In a half-hour meeting at IDEO, that would be a dismal failure. I mean, they would look for 100 ideas, literally. And so I don't know if we do anything unique to generate that enthusiasm, but we simply open the space. How might we, based on just a big wall or a map of ideas, we begin to cluster those a little bit and then ask people to really get into design thinking. How might we make this a reality? And I'm going to link back to the positive question or the appreciative question you raised earlier. When at that point in the process, groups often argue. They often debate. They often come up with entirely different scenarios that might be in conflict with each other. It's not all rose-colored glasses, because people are invested at that point. They really want to make something happen. So, of course, they have different views of, have we tried this before? Did it work? Is this feasible financially? There's all kinds of constraints and concerns that come in at that point. But again, designers love constraints. Designers see those as the opportunity to be creative. So we just try to suggest and reinforce those kinds of observations or lessons learned, so that it suspends the almost automatic desire to converge and get to a choice and take action.
Right. Or start to edit in advance of it, where people say, oh, that can't work. I saw I think it was a famous quote from Steve Jobs, who said, I want to see friction and noise like a diamond. A diamond is made with friction and heat and noise. And so ideation happens when the team is in there discussing, debating, as you talked about, arguing. But I think the key rule that you say is, this is not the place where we're editing. We are going to build, and we're going to allow the time to keep building, and the editing happens at another step.
Yeah, good point. I agree totally. And again, the noise in that quote that you speak to, the noise, the conflict, the bumping up, colliding maybe with ideas, that's only possible. Let's say it's only effective if there is a shared image of the future, a shared desire, a shared, we call it a positive image, holds the positive action. So it can be very effective and energizing to have that kind of noise, conflict, collision, but only if you've established through the discovery and the dream a sense of a shared positive image.
So there's two things I want to work on. One is words matter. So you talked about how might we. Those simple words open the mind. The other piece I'd like you to explore is this shared image. Who's responsible for the shared image? Is it the CEO who says, I have a shared image? Is it a leadership team that says, we have this challenge, so what are we going to do about it? How do a North Star or multiple stars in a constellation become part of a process here? I gave you two.
Most typically, in my experience, I like the idea of maybe multiple North Stars. The leadership is responsible for a starting point. The leadership initiates a call. So it's a upfront conversion of a problem or a crisis or a difficulty into an opportunity. So let's use the Navy example from before. Up front, it was the most senior leadership, the Chief of Naval Operations, who said, I have this retention problem. I know that they had already done exit interviews. Why did people leave? They'd done some stay interviews. Why did people stay? But that data hadn't helped them come up with ideas that really changed anything. So as we examined his story, his name was Admiral Vern Clark at the time, and we sat in a room in his office in the Pentagon, and we actually interviewed him and asked him about stories in his career where he thought about leaving but decided to stay, and just to walk us through what he remembered about the decision process and what he considered and who he talked to and so forth. He told two of those stories, and before we could ask for another one, he interrupted us and said, this is really interesting. And we said, what's coming to mind? And he said, in both those instances that I shared, the key thing that shifted and made me stay was I love the opportunity to lead. The Navy gives me increased responsibility, a little bit of a safety net, lots of feedback, and if I succeed, I then get more opportunity. I love that. And so what happened is in that meeting and then subsequently in a task force that he formed, the topic, which could have been retention, you could do an appreciative inquiry into retention. The topic became bold and empowered leaders at every level.
Wow.
So the idea is if we did an appreciative inquiry into how do we create bold and empowered leaders at every level, not just officer or NCO, every level, which would include the initial 18-month first tour, that connection is that will get us where we really need to go as a system. It will take care of retention, but it will do so many more things. So that shift in the focus was the responsibility and in that case, the kind of genius of that leader. Now he turned it over to a much larger task force to really dig in, learn the depths of the appreciative inquiry process, decide if they liked the topic or how they would tweak it. And they did. They did their own edit on it. Now you have a starting point. So that's the initial North Star. The results of going through an appreciative inquiry with a group of stakeholders, and in this case it was about 360 stakeholders in and outside of the Navy, the outcome is a dozen, 2 dozen change teams or project launch teams who have designed something based around a more specific North Star. And so, yes, you've gone from one big, we call it the affirmative topic, bold and empowered leaders at every level. And now you've gotten into an economic model for a 24/7 daycare at every naval base.
Yeah.
So that
it starts to break into the component parts. But I do, before we change subject, I want to reinforce the aspect that the problem statement is not the North Star. It really requires expertise to create something that is, what did you describe it as? Bold and affirmative.
We call it the affirmative topic.
The affirmative topic.
It has to be
every word. Yeah. Every word of how you phrase it, as you described it, it was quite different. I mean, I've got a retention problem to how do I create leaders at every level. Now, he's solving the same problem, but the structure of the words and what the words are really matter.
A good way to just enter that conversation with a leader who has shared a problem statement is to invite that person or a few at the very senior level to just begin to imagine you're on the other side of the problem. It's solved. Then what? What does that look like? What has changed? How does that fit with where you want to see the system going or your dreams for the system? And that begins to call up different words. It begins to call up different descriptions. And in many cases, you can begin to get the beginnings of that new framed topic.
Understand. So, Ron, let's look on both sides. How small of a team could a leader use if I'm listening and I'm a company of 25 or 50? And of course, you described, but how large it could be. And you also described it could be in person or virtual. Maybe you could describe about the scale and scopes that are available to a leader so that they're not afraid to use the methodology or test out the methodology.
Anywhere from a normal size work group, task force, office group to a global system. It really is scalable. David Cooperrider and I personally are attracted to the very large scale possibilities. Getting a whole supply chain for Walmart's clothing line together to figure out how might they become totally reliant on organic cotton or something like that. Their packaging supply chain. So it can be huge. On the one hand, it can be a team, 7, 12, 20 people. It's the same flow of conversation, flow of activity, but it's obviously the logistics and the timing of things will vary significantly.
Yeah. Yes, and that's what I noticed. The other thing, and then we'll come to conclusion, is as the team goes from dream to design, there's a phase called prototyping. And then as part of that prototyping, there's always the question of what is the smallest action we can take that will have the biggest impact? And what is the biggest action that we could take that would have the most transformative? So I think my questions to you are, why is physical prototyping so important? And why are those two questions such an important piece of ownership as the program goes to its next phase?
Well, the short-term, long-term transformational question is important to balance short-term visible activity. Other change models call it small successes, to maintain momentum, to maintain visibility. It's true that transformational things require extended planning. They may require a lengthy budgeting process to find the resources, or in some nonprofit cases, grant writing, even legislation in certain instances. So if we're only aiming for those, it's easy to get lost. It's easy to lose sight. So the short term, along with the long term, is just good management sense in terms of what can we do that keeps momentum visible and keeps people acting while they are also doing longer term planning, preparation, finding resources, and so on. The prototyping is, again, it's something we learn directly from IDEO. And what they taught us was that in the phase we were calling design, and even in those very successful cases that I mentioned, the Navy, Roadway, Green Mountain, Fairmont, those all happened before we learned about the prototyping. What the prototyping brings, Russell, is so you have a group of stakeholders that have chosen a certain set of ideas that came out of the design phase because they're most attracted to it. And so they've decided, we want to answer this question, how might we make this a reality? And so they're beginning to dig into what are all the different ideas about how. So they're brainstorming, they're sorting, prioritizing, looking for where do these ideas cluster and how do they relate with each other. And then the prototyping helps them literally bond behaviorally. So if we only do action planning, which is what we're doing in those success stories I mentioned, if you're only doing the action planning, it has the potential, or I guess you could say, the danger of simply becoming abstract, simply becoming, okay, we have this plan, we've made some notes on a paper, or we've filled out a little bit of a process chart, but it doesn't reside in the individuals yet. They've got some energy, some interest, when you prototype something, you actually make something together. You create something. And by prototype, we mean it. It's rough. It's not anything near.
I've seen those prototypes. They are rough.
It's not anything near any final product. But by building together, doing together, not just thinking together, more of the whole self is engaged. And what we see since we started using it is the momentum afterwards sustains longer.
Yeah. And I think, Ron, that when you think about the prototyping, and it could be a service, it could be a process, it doesn't have to be a product when you use the word prototype. What I witnessed was the stories told of their prototypes brought joy and laughter, and again, that neuroscience connectivity and memory and bonding of, well, how do we make this happen? And with leadership support, that team wants to do it because now they're engaged, invested, and what else could I ask for is a workplace that allows me to get engaged and bring a lot of myself than just my task, just my role. They value all of me. And so I think it really ties to the problem that employers are facing right now.
If you go back to when we started this conversation around engagement, it is the ultimate of engagement. It's calling for my whole self to be present, again, only for a day or a period of time. So obviously it has to be reinforced, but it's walking the talk of high engagement. You're not just asking people for ideas and then saying thank you and I'll get back to you. We've seen for 3 decades that form of so-called participative leadership doesn't break through. It doesn't give us the breakthroughs that we need. So we have to find new avenues for real engagement. And I know you know the statistics, but we haven't moved the needle in the last 10 years.
We haven't even moved in 20 years. Yeah. The Gallup statistics is engagement is sitting at around 30% over 20 years. That engagement, 70% of it is related directly to the manager. And feeling appreciated and valued and heard and listened to be able to grow is a crucial aspect of my engagement beyond compensation.
And I would add safety to that. You mentioned that earlier. Safety is, I think, way understood. Bad combination. We all assume it's safe. And I think more and more people are evidencing, nope, it's not.
No. So let's conclude on, Ron, if someone wants to learn, given the number of books and your colleagues, what would you say? Start with 1 or 2 things as a CEO to open up your mind of the potential. If you want to transform, you want to set your culture up, you really want engagement, you really understand, whether it be Boeing, I just saw on the news the other day, or the CEO of Bayer, who's it looked like he was working a process that is very appreciative inquiry, like what is the first small step that would help them gain frame and context to go on the journey?
I could think of a few first small steps. So one small step would be to hear in similar podcasts to this the details of a case. At the Cooper Ryder Center for Appreciative Inquiry at the Champlain University in Vermont, there is a growing series of very specific case studies in a conversation format like this. Might maybe 20, 30 minutes of time just to hear an example step by step in great detail. That's one thing. I think engaging someone that has some valid credentials of having used it and just having conversation with them where you share some of the things you're concerned about as a leader, and then just listen and hear how this approach might be an opportunity. So, obviously people like yourselves and others that have some credentials that they've been trained or that they've actually used it, some client feedback or recommendations, I think is a way to start. And then you mentioned there is an extensive literature base. And
yes,
some of that is in the category of what I call the small paperbacks. The less than 100-page read. There is literally the small book, short book.
The thin book of Appreciative Inquiry.
The thin book of Appreciative Inquiry. David Cooperrider and Diana Whitney have a small paperback on Appreciative Inquiry. Frank Barrett and myself, we have one. So there's a percentage of that library, that literature base, if you searched Amazon under Appreciative Inquiry, that are intended for the initial exposure, the initial read, the initial skimming for ideas.
Yeah. So, Ron, I'm just going to bring our conversation to a close. We probably could go for another hour. I'm incredibly grateful for your time. I'm grateful for, as you know, to be able to study under you and David and carry the power of Appreciative Inquiry deep in not only in my heart. I see it worked at my significant large Fortune client. I have another client I'm bringing it to because I have just witnessed it. There's the risk of thinking the positive is very low, and we've already spent 30 decades of thinking about what's not. So the risk of changing the mindset is so high, and then when you see the result, if you have any hesitation, just explore, but the outcomes are significant. And it does require a mind shift, starting with the leader. So I thank you, Ron, very much for your time and all of our listeners. So be sure to stay with us. And I will have an exciting guest next week.
Oh, thank you, Russell. It's a gift to be able to talk about what you're passionate about and what touches my heart. So thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. My pleasure. All right. So let me summarize the many topics that we covered in this episode. I think the first and most important topic that we covered was that to improve employee engagement, you literally have to walk the talk of engagement. And that engagement has been stuck at around the low 30s for over 20 years, no matter how much we study it. The second piece is that to improve engagement, you need a methodology that opens up the mind, that invites people into the process, and just collecting lists of things don't work. The research that Ron and many of his colleagues have found is that when you study what's broken, what's not working, you end up getting more of what's broken. Conversely, when you take a strength-based approach and you inquire and appreciate what is working, when are we at our best, when are we in our flow, you get more of that. The other thing that process allows to happen is that when team members are able to share their stories about when we're at our best and what we want to carry forward, they build these deep psychological trusted connections that allow them to create and design together. The other aspect of Appreciative Inquiry, which has a 4D process to it: discover, dream, design, and destiny or deliver, is that in the dream phase, you're looking to generate a lot of ideas. You're using the IDEO process. You're thinking like a designer. And so you need the team to be feeling comfortable together to build off of each other, to have friction and noise and pressure. Well, it could be this, it could be that. Well, what happens if we took this idea and build it upon that idea? We need a lot of ideas. And so, again, inviting a set of team members, or big team, a little team, from the dock worker to the boardroom to actually come together, whether it be virtual or in person, to dream together. What better way could you show that individual that they're valued, they're seen, they're heard, they're listened, and what better way can you start to begin their engagement change from the current state? I think the third thing is that every word matters. How a question is phrased, what is the problem statement? We did, Ron had talked about, the U.S. Navy talked about, we have an engagement problem or a retention problem. But that translated into the North Star of how do I create bold, courageous leaders at every level throughout the U.S. Navy, and how that appreciative inquiry process not only changed the problem, but saved $2 billion through a retention methodology. I think the last piece that I would say to all the leaders, and having witnessed and been participating and become an expert in this area, is that the current methods of problem solving, root cause analysis, don't get very far. We've milked that. And the risk of changing the perspective to when are we at our best, inviting everybody in to design what could be our future and what will it take? What is the smallest step we could take that will have the biggest outcome? What is the biggest step that could have a transformative outcome, and allow that freedom to happen, and allow the generative power of human potential and human creativity to come together? Whether Ron said it, a small group of 25 or 15 or a global supply chain to transform a company is incredible. Because you can get everything. You can improve your people, their engagement, your profits, and make the planet a better place, sustainability. And that's the responsibility of leaders today, the 3P bottom line. And so if you are a trailblazing leader and you are looking to thrive and grow and change your culture and go from A to B in mindset, take a moment, investigate, and discover the power of appreciative inquiry. And as I've said, on our website at kernandpartners.com, we have a program called Courageous Creativity Together. You can download the brochure, and then we can talk about customizing an appreciative inquiry, whether you're in manufacturing or advertising and marketing. But I certainly know for any leader looking for a major transformation, this is a critical topic for the months ahead and the years ahead, given the workforce, the new workplace, the changes, and the new technologies that we're sitting at. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Trailblazing Leaders Podcast. If you want to check out more episodes, you're going to find them on all major streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, YouTube. The podcast is also available at our website at kernandpartners.com. Thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you on our next episode.